Beams are one of the most important structural members. This is because beams transfer load from the slab down to the columns. Hi, I am Oshibe Godfrey, and today we shall be discussing how to identify primary and secondary beams and how the reinforcement is placed at site. First thing first, I want us to understand the difference between primary beams and secondary beams. Primary beams are the beams that transfer load from the slab directly to the columns, while secondary beams are the beams that transfer slab load directly to the primary beams and then the primary beams directly to the columns. Now, for us to differentiate between primary and secondary beam, we should be able to understand the difference between the origin of the reinforcement, the origin of the beam, then the origin of the beam, and load transfer. That's the two major things that differentiate primary beam and secondary beam, and also the placement, how the reinforcement is placed. For example, for us to identify primary beams here, this beam right here, from this column that originates from this column to this column here, that is primary beam. While this very beam here that runs from the middle of this beam to the middle of this beam, that's our secondary beam. So in other words, secondary beams are beams that originate from beam to beam per se. So secondary beams are beams that originate from beam to beam, while primary beams are those beams that originate from column to column. Then when we talk about the origin, for example now, if you want to know how it is placed, our primary beam will always come at the bottom because it is the one that is carrying the secondary beam. For example, this intersection now, in this very intersection, if you look down here, you will see that this one down here is the reinforcement of our primary beam. Look at it down here before the secondary beam, which is this very one, come on top of it. Now, because this very beam has two layers. The first layer here is for our primary beam. Then the second layer, this one that crossed, this one that intersected this way, is our secondary beam, and this layer up here is also our primary beam. So this is the best way. This is the way to place. This is the best way, or a way to place our beam if it has second layer, if it has double layer. The first primary one comes first before the secondary, then the primary comes on top of it. But if there is no second layer, it's simple. The primary comes first, then the secondary will come on top of it. That's for that. Then the origin, you see, the primary beam will always originate from the column. It will always originate from the column. Another example, this very beam right here, it has a very simple placement. If you come close here, you see that this is actually a primary beam, and this very beam here is a secondary beam. And if you come close here, you will see that the primary beam, the reinforcement for the primary beam is at the bottom, while the reinforcement of the secondary beam is on top of the reinforcement for the primary beam. That's just the simple placement. So in general, our primary beam, the reinforcement for our primary beam comes on the bottom, while the reinforcement for our secondary beam comes on top of it. This is because it is the primary beam that is carrying the secondary beam. And just as the load transfer, the load is transferred from the slab to the secondary beam, then from the secondary beam to the primary beam, and then finally to the column and then to the foundation. Thank you for watching.